Hey, what's up guys, CodefForge here, welcome in the next video. Today we will learn how to use table per class inheritance strategy using JPA and Hibernate in the Java Spring Boot application. On the screen you can see the project setup. It will be the Maven project and we'll use Java 8. On the right side you can find the dependencies which we'll use. And we will use H2 database dependency for our in-memory database. We'll use Spring Web and of course Spring Data JPA. Okay, so this is the setup of our project. Now we can generate it and start coding. Okay, so project is here. Now we can open it and navigate to the source, main, resources, and we want to open application properties. Over here I will paste some properties from the previous videos, and this is basically the configuration of the JPA and the H2 database. And if you want to find out what is going on over here in this properties file, you can check out my video which is dedicated to the H2 configuration. Okay, then now we can move on and we'll create our entities. So we want to go to the Java main package of our application, and over here we want to create a new package and we will call it model. Inside we want to create our new Java class entity, so we select new Java class and we will call it spell. And it is not the spell like the Spring expression language, but it is the spell which we can find in the RPG games. It will be our super type. And now we will also have two more entities. So we want to create another Java class and it will be the fire spell. And also one more which will be the frost spell. So again, Java class and it will be frost spell. We'll start with the spell entity. So we want to go over here to the spell class, and in the first place we want to mark it with the entity annotation, and also we want to specify the strategy. So to do it we want to use inheritance annotation, and to specify the strategy we want to use the strategy attribute, and we want to use the table per class strategy. Now we want to create the properties which will be common for our child classes. So in the first place we want to have the primary key, and to do it you want to use the ID annotation together with the generated value annotation. But we have to set this generated value annotation strategy to generation type auto. And of course you want to put it on the private long ID field. So we have the primary key, that's good. Each spell will also have names, so we want to say private string name. And the next thing that will be common for our spells will be energy cost, so we'll say private integer energy cost. And the last thing will be private integer and it will be damage. We will also generate the constructors, so the first one will be the default constructor. So over here we want to select none, and also we want to generate another constructor for the name, energy cost and damage, because ID will be auto-generated. By the way, this table per class strategy is very similar to mapped superclass annotation approach. The difference is that we will have the table for the spell entity, and in the case of the mapped superclass we would not have this table. And we can easily change it by marking this class as the abstract. So right now the JPA will not generate the table for this spell class, but we don't want to do it over here, so let's delete it. Okay, now we can move on and take care of our fire spell over here. So in the first place we want to mark it with the entity annotation, and let's also specify the table name. So we want to use the table annotation with the name attribute, and we'll set it to the fire_spell. Let's also add it to the spell entity. So we want to copy it, go to the spell, and over here we'll paste it under the entity annotation, and we'll change the name from the fire spell to spell. And now we can go back to the fire spell. Now we want to make our fire spell to extend the spell. So we want to go over here and we want to say extends spell. Thanks to that, our fire spell will inherit all of the properties and mapping information from the spell entity. We also want to add few properties specific for this fire spell entity. So we want to say private integer, and it will be damage over time, and also private integer damage over time duration. It looks good. So now we can generate the constructors. The first one will be the default one required by the Hibernate. So we want to select none. And the second one with the parameters which we'll use later. So we want to select constructor. We want to call the constructor from the superclass, and later on we want to initialize our fields. And it will look like this. Let's make it a little bit more readable. So yeah, it looks good. Now we can move on to the last entity, which is the frost spell. And over here in the first place, we'll mark it with the entity annotation and we'll specify the table. So we'll use the table annotation and we'll set the name to the frost underscore spell. This one will also extend the spell entity. So we want to say extends spell. And now it's time for some frost spell specific fields. So it will be private boolean freezing. So it will indicate if our frost spell is freezing the target, and the private integer, and it will be freeze duration. Now we can generate the constructors. So in the first place, it will be the default one, and we want to select none. And the second one for the superclass and our new fields. And we'll also move few parameters to the next line. And it is good. So now we can start the application to check out if our database structure is correct. So we want to go to the Maven, and over here we want to go to the plugins, Spring Boot, and we want to select Spring Boot Run to start our application. And after a few seconds it should be up and will open the web console of the H2 database. Okay, so here's the console of the H2 database. We are on the local host on the port 8080 and the path is /H2. And we can log in using the default user and password. And we can see over here that for each entity we have a separated table. And if we select the spell table in the first place, we can see that we have the ID, damage, energy cost, and the name. So in this table we'll store very basic spells which will only deal damage without any other extra effects. And if we navigate to the frost spell, for example, we can see over here that we have the columns from the super type, which is the spell, and we have the ID, damage, energy cost, and the name. But also we have the frost spell specific columns, which is the freeze duration and freezing. Okay, so we can close it up, stop the application, and take care of the repositories. So we want to create a new package in the first place. So we select new package and we'll call it repository. We will have 3 repositories and let's create them. So the first one will be spell repository. Another one will be fire spell repository, and it will be also interface. And the last one will be frost spell repository. Okay, so let's start with the spell repository over here. And the first thing we want to do is to mark it as the repository using the repository annotation. And also we want to mark it as the primary. And we have to do it because later in our code, we will retrieve beans from the Spring context. And when we will request for the spell repository bean from the context, Spring will not know which bean should be returned, because we will have spell repository and also the interfaces which are extending this spell repository, and those are fire spell repository and frost spell repository. You will see it in the action later. And now we want to say extends over here, and we want to extend CRUD repository for the super type, and in our case it is spell, and it has primary key type of long, and we also have to import it. Now we can move on to the fire spell repository, and here we also want to annotate it with the repository annotation. And one more thing to do over here is to say extends, and this time it will be spell repository instead of CRUD repository. And we want to do the same for the frost spell repository, so all we have to do is to mark it with the repository annotation and say extends spell repository. Our repositories are ready, so we can go to the main class of our application. And over here in the first place we want to retrieve the context. So we'll create a variable which will be the type of configurable application context with the same name, and we'll assign to it the result of the run method. And now let's retrieve the spell repository bean from the context. So to do it, we want to create a spell repository type variable in the first place, and it will have the same name. And now we can use the configurable application context and say get bean and specify the type of the bean which we want to retrieve, and it will be spell repository.class. And if we will run this code right now, it will work because we have added this primary annotation over here on the interface. But let's try to comment it out and start the application. So we can go to the Maven over here and say Spring Boot run. And after a few seconds we should get an error. Let's wait for it, and here it is. And if we scroll it up over here, we can find that Spring found 3 beans that are matching spell repository, and it does not know which one to pick. And this is because our spell repository is extended by a fire spell repository and frost spell repository. So this is why we need this primary annotation, and thanks to that the spell repository will be returned by default. So we can uncomment it for now, and we can go back to our main class. And we will need 2 additional repositories. So the next one will be also type of spell repository because it is our super type, but the name will be frost spell repository. And now we also want to retrieve it from the context. So we want to call getBean method, but this time we want it for the frost spell repository.class. And over here we will not have any problems because the frost spell repository is not extended by another interface, so Spring will know to return this particular bean. Same applies to the fire spell repository, so we will say spell repository over here with the name fire spell repository. And we want to retrieve it from the context, of course. using getBin method, and we want to retrieve fire spell repository.class. Now we want to take care of our objects, and the first one will be the type of spell, and we will call the variable arcane spark, and we will use the spell constructor, so we want to say new spell. Inside we have to provide arguments, and the first one is the name, so it will be arcane spark. Next one is the energy cost, and let's say it will be 50, and the damage will be 60. Now let's create some fire spells, so it will be the spell type, and this one will be the fireball. This time we want to use the fire spell constructor, so we want to say new fire spell. The name will be of course fireball, so we want to say fireball. Over here energy cost will be a little bit higher because it is more powerful spell, so it will be 100. Damage will be also higher, so it will be 100. And now some fire specific properties, which are damage over time, so let's say it will be also 100, and the damage over time duration, let's say it will be 2000 in milliseconds, right? Okay, let's create one more fire spell, and this one will be really powerful, so we want to use the spell type, and it will be called meteor shower. And again we want to use the new fire spell constructor. The first argument is the name, so it will be meteor shower. After this we have the energy cost, so let's say it will be 400 because it is more powerful than the fireball. And the damage will be 300, and later on is damage over time, which will be 300. And let's say the duration will be 3 seconds, so we want to provide the 3000, like this. And the last spell which we will create is the frost spell, so we want to use the spell type again, and we will call it frost bolt. And we want to use new frost spell constructor. The name argument will be frostbolt, so we want to say frostbolt over here. And the energy cost, so we'll set it to 80. We will have damage set to 80 also. Freezing will be set to true. And the last one on our list is freeze duration, so let's say it will be 300 milliseconds. So now we can persist our spells, so we go over here at the bottom, and the first one will be arcane spell, so we want to say spell repository.save arcane spark. The same goes for the fire spells, but we will use fire spell repository, and we want to call save method, and the first one will be fireball, and the second one will be also fire spell repository, and we want to call the save method for the meteor shower. And the last one on our list is the frost spell, so we want to use the frost spell repository save method, and we will pass our frostbolt object. So now we can stop the application and start it again. So we go to the Maven and we want to hit Spring Boot Run. After a few seconds it should be up, and we'll open H2 console to check if our data is persisted. Okay, here it is. We are again on the localhost port 8080 on the path H2, and we want to connect using the default user. Our tables are here, so in the first place let's check out the spell table. Everything looks okay, so now let's check out our frost spell. And over here it is also looking good. And the last table, which is the fire spell table, it's over here, and we should have 2 entries. And yeah, we have the fireball entry and the meteor shower entry. So everything works as expected. Okay, so this is all I wanted to show you guys. You can still play with this code. So for example, you can try to edit some spells or try to delete them. And yeah, thank you for watching. Remember about liking the videos and subscribing to the channel, because it really helps me out to deliver the high quality content for you guys. See you in the next video. Bye.